So I'm thinking about plants both that can be accentuated with lighting in the garden, which Rahina is going to talk about, but also plants that will just capture moonlight on a bright night, moonlight and starlight, and plants that might move a little bit with the breeze and might smell good also. So agave blue flame is one of my all-time favorite agaves, not only because it has this really kind of flame-like, wave-like shape, but also it's less dangerous than most agaves. And it also just is got this incredible kind of blue whale color. So I actually read, and I thought that I added it to my notes here, but it didn't appear. I read that it has this waxy coating that adds to the blue, and you should avoid overhead watering because that kind of removes some of the blue color. But anyway, it's a great sculptural, architectural plant that is good up against a wall for its silhouette, as well as kind of tipping over a wall. And I noticed in my garden, it sort of turns its giant head toward the sun as it grows. So you should kind of keep that in mind when you're going to plant one. Aim it, just know that it's going to turn toward the sun.
You mentioned watering, but does it need any water at all once it's established?
Not much. Oh, I see the note. Sorry, I got the note in the wrong place. These succulents in general, you know, like all plants, they need a little more than normal for establishment. But once they've been in the ground a few months or so, you know, every couple of weeks is probably fine. They, you know, unlike most people who think, oh, they're succulents, they need no water. Succulents really do like some water, but they just store it very well in their fleshy foliage, right? So mine is on a mound that I created with some kind of well-draining soil after I sheet mulched my lawn. And, you know, you don't ever see it wilt, right? So I probably water it every 2 weeks and it's fine. And speaking of water, this next plant, the agave ovatifolia, the whale's tongue agave, is probably the whitest of the large agaves. And it's, of course, going to catch a ton of light, moon and artificial. And what's different about this one is that it's perfectly symmetrical. It kind of grows straight up and just becomes rounder and rounder and rounder and bigger and bigger. And I have read that it can get to really 7 or 8 feet across if you water it a lot. So unless you want an enormous agave, really just water this occasionally. And one more gorgeous succulent that has a wonderful architectural form with leaves that are kind of more separate from the agaves is the yucca. And this one is super bright year round with those very bright pale yellow stripes on the outside margins of the leaves. And what's nice about all these agaves and yuccas is that they look good year round. So even if you have perennials and shrubs that need cutting back or aren't their most beautiful in the dead of winter, these guys will always be there for you. So this plant I like if I'm doing a garden that's got a lot of creamy colored things, cream or pale yellow or pale orange flowers, and even some pinks, because you can see there's just a tiny, tiny tinge of pink on the very edge of the foliage. So it's very versatile and tough. Moving along to our first native plant. I know when you think of lighting in the garden, you often first think, okay, I'm going to uplight all my trees. So that's perfectly doable. But let's say you have a really small garden and you can't fit a tree, or your tree isn't really all that pretty. If you plant one of these mid-sized manzanita shrubs or small trees, very quickly they're going to start developing these beautiful mahogany colored trunks and branches that of course lend themselves to some gentle lighting. And also in the winter, they bloom for a couple months with these gorgeous pale pink urn-shaped flowers. So those also will catch some light. This variety, Austin Griffiths, is wonderful because it's truly just mid-size. I've had mine in my front yard right next to the sidewalk for about 12 years, and it's maybe 6 foot by 6 foot, and I just prune it in summertime a few inches here and there. So it's pretty slow, but it definitely looks like a nice structural small tree. Now, grasses, of course, when they bloom, they have gorgeous silhouettes. And I love this Penicillium spathiolatum, slender belt grass, because even though the grasses look sort of diminutive when they plant them and their foliage maintains kind of an 18-inch orb once they start sending up their spikes, it's alarming how tall they get and how gorgeous they get. One of my clients complained that the spikes were hiding his house, and I just couldn't believe that guy. They were so beautiful. So anyway, these can be planted both in a really naturalistic garden, just kind of sprinkled here and there with other grasses and other shapes, or you can plant them in a grid for a super modern look, and it's just gorgeous either way. And one thing I've learned from plant or grass experts is that, unlike the way a lot of gardeners cut back their grasses and they cut them into that dome shape because they think that's how they're supposed to grow, apparently that's a recipe for death, and you're supposed to cut them just straight across the top. So this grass is a warm season grass, which means that it blooms a little bit later in the year. And that means that you can prune it in early spring. You can hold on to those seed heads even through the winter and enjoy them in their kind of dormant, sleepy state, but you'll enjoy their architecture. And then once spring comes around and they're barely starting to get their new growth, that's when you can cut them straight across the top.
So they have to be pruned twice.
No, just once a year.
Okay.
Yeah. So what you want to do essentially with all grasses is you want to prune them just when the new growth starts to come out. So that way that they don't sit around for months doing nothing, and you can enjoy the shapes of the seed heads. Even though the grasses have gone dormant, you can still enjoy the way they look. So this is another warm season grass, the Muhlenbergia dubia, pine muley, which is really great. It's because it's about 2/3 the size of the Muhlenbergia rigens, which is our native. This is like almost a native, not quite, but it's much more usable in the home garden because it's not so huge. And this is a little stiffer than the other grass because it kind of makes this starburst pattern, and it just holds it forever. So another one that's so great with probably backlighting, and even sunset lighting from the back, of course, is so beautiful. So this again is warm season, so you can prune it in the early spring. And this is another one of my favorite grasses, which also, like this Pennisetum, is surprising in how fast and tall it grows. Bouteloua gracilis blonde ambition. It's a variety of the Bouteloua gracilis, which is a little bit more tame than this guy. This one is truly blonde and truly ambitious. So these plants this photo was taken maybe 6 months after they were planted as 4-inch plants, just to give you an idea of how fast they can grow. And so they're just so stunning with lighting, and they move in the wind constantly. And they're super soft, very forgiving. So if you plant them along the driveway or along the sidewalk, they'll be perfectly fine. Now here's another native that everybody loves. It's got a fantastic scent. And you probably know that this is the sage that is used in those little bundles of sage sticks that people use to kind of swing around their house to get rid of evil spirits and bad smells. I haven't tried that, but maybe I should. So anyway, this is a great plant because it's super duper white and silver, and it also has gorgeous long flower spikes. It's a fast grower and tends to be pretty leggy, so I often will sacrifice the flower spikes in order to keep the plant dense, which is a hard decision, but if you have the room, you can keep those spikes, but just know that it's going to really spread out. And this plant is very low water, hardly needs anything. Here's another native, the gorgeous Dudleya bretonii, giant chalk Dudleya. The photo on the bottom I just took this morning in my garden, and that one is probably a little bit more than a foot across, and I couldn't even fit all the flower spikes in the photo because they're about 18 inches tall. They're fantastic. So I love this Dudleya. Anytime I put a boulder in a garden, I always tuck a Dudleya at the front of it. And I always know that kids are going to love looking at this plant, and that it's going to be something that's going to really light up the garden. Also, super low water. I usually put a handful of gravel underneath the foliage, even if I've mulched the rest of the garden, to be sure that those lower leaves don't sit in water.
Does this one creep? Like, does it spread by?
Oh, no, this one does not make pups as far as I know. But luckily it doesn't die after it flowers like agaves. It just gets wider and wider, and the only thing that happens is it develops a little trunk, but it's many, many, many years before you'll even actually see the trunk. So you just kind of leave it alone. So here's a little non-native Annie's Annuals find. I just love this plant because it's got these perfect like little baby tennis ball shaped spiky flowers. Everything about it is spiky, so wear your gloves. But it comes back every year really easily, and even has some foliage throughout the winter, so you never have a bare spot in the garden. And just this metallic blue with the silver stems is really, really rare in nurseries. So I like the idea of lighting up this little baby, even if it's near a path light, you know, you'll catch those little orbs in the light.
Is it, and what time of year does it flower? Do you know?
Summer, just kind of midsummer into the fall. And those little seed heads can hold on for a while, so you can watch them go through their changes of color. So this teucrium, there's lots and lots of teucriums out there. This is one of the flattest of all, and I found that you can't even capture how silver it really is with a photograph. This is just a baby one that's got some of its summery blooms. And what I like about this is that it's just really, really silver, and it stays ever silver year round. So if you want something super low and soft that might catch the light down below a path light, then you can use this Teucrium acromanii. And for a taller plant that can be used as a screen or just something to fill up some space, we've got the very frequently used Pittosporum, although this silver magic is fairly new and not quite as common. It's a relative of silver sheen, which a lot of people buy at the nurseries to screen their neighbors, and then they always forget to prune them and they become 60 feet tall. This one I don't think will get anywhere near that tall, but it's still pretty fast growing and should be tip pruned to keep it full. But you can see those gorgeous creamy white edges and the kind of olivey sagey green centers and the black stems. So it's got a lot going on. And I'm sure that, you know, patio lighting or party lighting or anything will really catch the bright edges very well.
So this one is a dwarf version of the other Pittosporum, right? The other one grows much taller.
Yeah, I don't know that they call it a dwarf, but usually with variegated foliage of, you know, a variegated version of any plant, usually it has, you know, I guess less chlorophyll, so it grows more slowly. And yeah, I wouldn't expect this to get any taller than 15 feet or so, even unpruned.
Does it tolerate heavy pruning if you need to?
Yeah, you could probably prune it into a little ball if you wanted to. might be needed every month or so, but you could do it. But I'd probably recommend buying a smaller variety if you really want it small. But I think you can easily keep it to 6 feet. So lastly, I heard there was a request for night blooming plants, and this is commonly known, this night blooming jasmine, although it's not actually a jasmine, it's a cestrum nocturnum. It is a moderate water plant, so if I were going to use it, I would put it someplace maybe close to the house where I could just dump out the water I use to clean my lettuce, or somewhere near an outdoor shower, just someplace where you won't require a whole valve worth of moderately watered plants. But anyway, it's got really pretty leaves and creamy, kind of greenish, creamy flowers, and it's supposed to fill the night air with really heady fragrance. So if you guys use it, let me know how it is. And that's the end of my show.
Very nice. I like the variety of different leaf types, like the foliage.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
And grasses, I always like them because they add so much movement, you know, they keep, like in the breeze, they look really nice.
Yeah, I think grasses also sort of make you feel more like you're part of the garden, because you can almost, you know, have a feeling of you're moving through the garden and they're moving with you.
Yeah. Does anybody have any questions for Anne?
Okay, sounds like you want all your plants.
All right, so let me share my screen.
Okay, and I'll stop sharing.
Okay, so when I was thinking of this presentation, I thought it would be interesting to have a combination of lighting and plants for nighttime gardens. because usually we don't think of the garden, we think of the garden mostly for daytime use. And recently I received quite a few requests for, either lighting or a range of colors of plants, like plant blooms. And one of my landscape architect friends said, oh, there's this new trend of, lighting and landscape for nighttime gardens. So that's why I thought this would be an interesting topic to start. So landscape lighting is important for many reasons. Firstly, for safety, because it prevents trips and falls, especially at steps and when there's like elevation changes at stairs, decks. And then for security, because it brightens up the edges of the property and kind of demarcates how different zones are lit up at night, whether it's a patio or the front yard or the back patio. And mostly designers think of lighting to enhance the mood, create an ambiance, and to light up different features, architectural features in the garden. So while designing lighting, it's very important to keep in mind also how lighting affects other life in the garden. So in the last 10 or 15 years, through studying for the LEED exam, I came to know that light disruptions cause a lot of pollution, nighttime pollution, and this affects both plants and insects. So plants that bloom in the fall may never bloom or can bloom at the wrong time because they have, they don't experience the shortening of days. And the same goes for trees. The trees keep leaves green, which under the shorter days, they would actually drop their leaves. So lighting can interfere with plant life, and it can also interfere with pollinators and insects that feed off of plants. So the picture right next to this text is of a bird that's right outside my window. So this hummingbird has decided to build a nest right outside my window. And I'm always very careful in the late afternoon to kind of switch off, close the blinds and make sure that the light outside is not, the lighting inside the room does not affect him. Because birds, usually when they're exposed to artificial light, they can become distressed, they can lose sleep, they can wake up earlier in the day. And so this affects their, they can lay eggs earlier in the season, and sometimes it's too far ahead for available food for the young ones. And similarly for bats, they can miss their prime time for eating insects when lights are extended artificially. So this morning when I was talking to Anne, we had this conversation about what is the best light for insects. And there are three, generally insects can see three types of light: ultraviolet, blue, and green. So usually the range of light, the bright whites and the bluish light are the most attractive. So this range of light is the most attractive. And the yellow lights and the red lights go unnoticed. So the yellow lights are preferred, if you don't want to have the insect come to the light. And because they go unnoticed, it doesn't affect them. So in landscape lighting, there are different types of light fixtures. There's path lighting, step or deck lighting, underwater lighting, which I don't typically get into because that's part of the pool design, and uplighting and downlighting. And these are some of the fixtures that I've used. And typically what I do is when I design the layout, I have it, I work with a landscape contractor who's a lighting contractor. So he kind of lets me know about the spacing and any, wattage. So I keep it very low. So usually it's 3 to 6 watts per light. And then they are in different zones by either different types of light fixtures. So the zones all lead up to, if you can see, they all lead up to one transformer. and there's a limit per transformer. So you have to kind of add up the wattage, and there's a limit for the transformer. But in general, I keep it very low wattage. And if it's next to the building, the architect usually designs, downlights from the extended patio. So that part is very low lit.
So when you say 3 to 6 watts, is that for LED lighting or?
Yes, yes. So landscape lighting is always like low voltage, and I do LED mostly. I use LED fixtures. Architectural lighting, sometimes architects like to enhance features like brick walls or stone walls, and they like to, kind of exaggerate the details of a facade. Entrances and gateways or statues can be uplit, and you can have spotlighting or highlighting, silhouetting lighting from the back of either like a sculpture or some kind of landscape feature. Shadowing is another one. You can have like a wall frame that creates a shadow of the wall. And graze lighting, spotlighting, or highlighting are different types of architectural lighting. When it comes to light fixtures, there's a whole, there's a lot of literature on different types of light fixtures, but mostly solar lights are very inexpensive. So a lot of lights surrounding landscapes use solar lights. Then there's fluorescent lights, halogen lights, and neon lights. So fluorescent lights can be the white light or the slightly yellowish tinge, and halogen lights are more yellow, and neon lights come in different colors. So this was this. Yeah.
Can I interrupt?
Yeah, sure.
So the solar lights, are those the ones that collect energy from the sun during the day and then light up at night? Is that?
Yes. So there are different ones. They're not very effective because this one, this is an example of a solar light that was used. So I worked on this deck project, and they asked for step lights and up lights for the deck, but they didn't install any of those lights. And they only installed the solar light, which is very low. You can barely see that light
Exactly. That's why I was going to add. Every time I see them, they always look like they're like not working anymore because they're so dim.
Yes, they're very dim. So I think it would be better to invest in a better, something that's not solar, something that's LED and slightly brighter. And even if it's like, I wouldn't say like make the whole garden like lit up at night, but at least have because they're LED, they're low voltage, you can use them like 5 feet on center and have some kind of uniform lighting around the garden. So usually when I work on lighting, if it's a residential project, I work with a lighting contractor who reviews my drawings. But sometimes for commercial projects, there are lighting companies that will do a study of the actual lumens, the spread of the light, and they'll make sure that there's uniform lighting along the entire property. So some cities require that for security. This is an example of uplights. So there are these wall lights that can be attached to gate columns. And you can have, on top of the column, you can have lights. There are some cities that don't prefer that because that causes a lot of light pollution when you have the light on top of the column. And they also require, some notes that say that exterior lighting will not be directed towards the street, the sky, or neighboring properties, and shall be a maximum of 60 watts for incandescent and equivalent for LED. So light pollution and light trespass is very, very important. It's something that you have to be careful of when you design lighting. This is a project I worked on a few years ago where they asked for lighting for a restaurant, and it was the Maggie Brown restaurant, and they wanted path lights like bollard lights, pole lights, string lights, and a lantern. It's a historic building, so they wanted something that looked slightly historic, but also kind of kept up with the modern finishes. So the inspiration was this lantern light under a pergola, and what I used was this fixture, which was from this company called Y Lighting. It's a conglomerate of lighting companies. So in California, there are different lighting ordinances. The state has, these light zones, and they look at lighting as for undeveloped, it's very low, these areas are wildlife preserves, so there's very low lighting requirements, or you can only light it up to very low grade. Zone 1 is where it's developed, but it's public parks and recreation areas. Zone 2 is rural areas. Zone 3 is most of urban areas and residential urban areas. And Zone 4 is special districts that are created by local governments for health and safety. So they have special, lighting requirements. And when I was studying for the licensure for landscape architecture, there was rating for lights, and this was the bug rating, which is backlight, uplight, and glare. So different luminaires have to keep up with, they have to reduce the uplight, backlight, and glare, so that the lighting that's actually coming from the fixture lights only the portion that needs to be lit up, whether it's a parking space, it doesn't create too much backlight, uplight, or glare. And that rating is used, you can call the light company and find out what the rating is for that light fixture. This was a project where this is a commercial property, which was a very small lot, but the police department required a lighting study to make sure that the light intensity was adequate for the entire property. So the backyard, had to be lit up. So these circles show the extent of the light fixture lightings, the spread of the light fixture lights. And so that shows that it covers the entire parking lot. And there are some lights that are exempt. Those are signage, lighting for building facades, uplights from public monuments, statues, vertical surfaces of bridges, lighting for health and safety ordinance, temporary outdoor lighting that does not go beyond 60 consecutive days. So if you have an event or something, and you have temporary lighting, you don't have to make sure that it keeps with the bug ratings. Replacement of existing pole mounted luminaires that are spaced wider. So if you have a renovation project and you decide to replace it with very sparse, where the spacing is more than 6 times than the pole mounted lights, then those don't need to keep up with the bug ratings. And these are some additional requirements. So when you have, when I work on a lighting plan, they usually ask for these 3 controls. So the lights have to be switched off during the day, and they have to be it's turned off automatically. So it has to be automatic control to be switched off during the day. They have to be controlled by a time-based scheduling control and motion sensors. So if you have a certain luminaire that's greater than 40 watts and mounted less than 24 feet and above the ground, shall be motion controlled. So there's also a space, like a distance from the house, where you have to have these motion controls. So that is it about lighting. So overall, when it comes to lighting, I work with contractors, and I also call the lighting company that does these, light spread studies, because I think that's a very useful way to find out whether the light distribution is even, and it's a good way to kind of make sure that the entire property is well lit while not being like overlit. Does anybody have any questions?
Thank you. It's very interesting. I thought for sure mention would be made of angels' trumpets. They seem to jump to mind when one thinks of plants that are kind of showy at night and smell at night. But these were very, very nice ideas. Thank you.
Angel's trumpet is the one, it's a vine, right?
No, the one I'm thinking of is it's sort of a little tree, and it has those large, showy,
Yeah.
trumpet-like flowers that hang down, and the blooms open at night, I think, but then they can persist, and the smell comes out at night too, I think.
Yeah, I've seen those. They look like datura.
Yeah, datura,
Yeah.
or they're Brugmansia.
Brugmansia, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, they look kind of almost like a weed. I don't know. Sometimes they look too droopy, like the kind of all the blooms are like drooping, right?
Yes.
You mean after they're spent, or?
Is that all the time or late?
Oh, yeah. That's just the way they grow.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, they do hang down, yes.
Yeah.
Very prominent flowers.
They're not very common up here in the hills, though. You don't see them that much up here. I see them in Palo Alto and places like that. I don't know why.
Huh. So yeah, it was hard to come up with plants that only seem to have a good scent at night. Even Googling it was a little tricky.
There's one of these the sempervirens, the blue leafed succulent.
Yeah.
That one, there's a Mount Everest. It's a very tall, it grows really tall. And I have one outside my window. It has these really like light blue, almost iridescent leaves. And at night, it kind of, it shows up even in the late evening. It's pretty nice. It's almost like it's lit at night.
You don't know what the genus is? Oh, it's the Senecio. The Senecio, those fingertip ones?
Yes, Senecio.
Yeah,
Not
yeah,
separate. Senecio Mount Everest.
Yes, they do grow very tall. That's
Yeah.
true.
This
Blue
one,
chopsticks.
yeah, blue chopsticks. I got it from Western Horticulture, and it's grown like even taller. It's like 4 feet tall.
Yeah.
And it looks very nice. I wish I could use it more, but it's more like an accent plant. It's not something you would, have like mass planting. The
Yeah.
other one is like ice plant, which is supposed to be invasive.
Yeah.
So
Don't
I
plant
don't-
that.
Yeah. So Marcus, what is your interest? Is it more in plants or is it more for lighting?
Well, I guess both. Both. I'm interested in both. Yeah. So.
Are you a designer? What kind of work do you do?
Oh no, I'm an engineer.
You're an engineer.
But in my free time, I like to garden quite a bit. So when I have some free time, it's either spend it with my wife and kids, or else I'm out in the garden.
It's rare to find a family where all members like gardening.
It's pretty much just me, unfortunately. My wife is not at all. Which the benefit of that is I get a free reign. Inside the house, I don't get to get away with just anything, but in the garden, I can probably do almost what I want. It's nice.
Yeah, I'm an avid gardener when it comes to like, more when the plants are about to die, I guess. I don't want to like be negligent, but it's like a practice. I guess you have to, in the winter, you don't have to water these plants. So then I get out of practice, and then now I'm like getting back into it. And the summer can be quite aggressive. Like at least last summer was very hot and you had to water plants
Oh, yeah.
every day.
Oh, that's not good. Yeah. You've got to be growing plants that grow in the desert. So Ruhina,
Yeah,
do you
yeah.
know,
A lot of the plants you picked are very water wise. That's nice.
all of them are, yeah.
I'm certainly guilty of not following that, but I should more and more.
Yeah, I think the plants that I have, they're actually drought tolerant. A couple of them are, you know, in the backyard, I got these, I somehow bought, like most of them are non-native because they were already there. Aloes, and there was a few pennisetum, lavender, and iris. I don't ever water that backyard, and it's always looks nice all year round. Like the lavender is always blooming, the aloe blooms profusely in the spring, you know, spring and summer, and the grasses look really nice. But the front yard is more like, you know, toyon and heuchera, which I thought heuchera was drought tolerant, but it gets droopy after a couple of days, you know. So it has to be, it's native, and I thought it was drought tolerant, and it's in a shady spot, but it needs a lot more water than I thought.
Maybe it's not the native one then.
Yeah, I think it's the brown leaves, the heuchera, the purple brown.
Yeah, I don't think there are any purple ones that are native.
I have native heucheras, and they are very drought tolerant.
Right. Yeah, the maxima and the micrantha. And,
Yeah.
I think the purple leaf ones for the most part are not, although I have one called amethyst mist. Because a lot of heucheras want, I think, colder winters, and the amethyst mist, I was told, is longer lived in this area.
Oh, okay.
I just planted some like a week ago in a lot of shade, and I've only watered them twice, and I just planted them and they're fine.
Oh, okay.
I think they might want some clay.
Oh, clay soil.
To hold the water, yeah.
Mhm.
And lots of mulch, 3 inches of mulch.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I bought a whole bunch of plants from CNPS, and I've killed all of them. Like the mimulus, I had this beautiful, beautiful mimulus that lived for 6 months, and it was doing really well, and then it died. I don't know what I did to it, you know. And so I like to collect plants, but I don't think I can, you know, some of them are a little touchy about the amount of water. They're not on a, you know, if I'm hand watering and they're not on an irrigation system.
Well, maybe one of the native plant experts can chime in about that.
Yeah, Julie and Carol.
I think the mimulus, they said, prefers very good drainage. I have one that died when it was planted out in the garden where it got more moisture than it should have. Somebody said they like to keep theirs in a container so that it does keep good drainage, or else probably sit it on a mound.
So they can't be in pots, I guess, unless you have like well-drained.
They can be in pots if you have, you know, like a cactus, maybe mixture with something else.
Yeah, I've seen it. I've seen mimulus in El Camino Hospital. They have it outside as a mass planting with agave, yellow mimulus, and this agave in the front. It looks beautiful because it's flowering profusely, like all through spring, summer, and it looks really nice. The small yellow flowers.
If there was agave, they probably don't get much water then.
Yeah, I guess they're in the same zone. They're not planted separately. Yep.
Well, I've got to sign off. I got to run to the copy shop before it closes.
Yeah, me too. Well, it was very nice to share this presentation with you, Anne.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Very
Thank you.
educational.
Very
Yeah.
interesting.
Thank you.
And I hope everybody learned something and is able to use it in their, landscape design.
Oh, well. All right. Have a great weekend, everybody.
Yeah, you too.
Bye.
Thanks. Bye.